other one was the last. She'll be 90 in a month. All the parents have hit slow, progressive.
One aunt left, and she's been a nun for 70 years.
Michelle on? Okay.
Sounds like-
Baby.
So you have
she's
Michelle,
baby.
Craig, and Matt.
Everybody else is gone. My mom was the last one to go.
I mean, as
Well,
far as,
that's Matt, yes, we have Matt.
Sounds like my
we have
uncle's
Michelle, we have
brother.
Craig.
South
Okay,
Korean brother.
good.
He'll be 90 next June.
Yeah, and she's down in La Crosse at St. Rose's. It's beautiful. Take care of her own, but then she's counts all she's done since she graduated. Did she go to high school in Stratford, or did she go to, I can't remember if she was 14 when she went down to the convent and went to high school down there and in college, or if she, because a lot of them didn't go to high school. They're from Stratford.
Was she, did she go into just the, what do they call it?
She's a
The
Francis,
convent,
yeah.
Franciscan?
Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. And she's got her master's degree. She taught first and second grade, usually first grade. She always had that mentality when she was dealing with you always felt you were a first grader.
You gotta be tough, man.
Oh, first graders are better than middle school, especially today.
Probably not wrong, my son is 13 and he's
How old is your
When-
daughter?
As they get older, you get smarter. There's hope.
How old
There's
is your
hope.
daughter?
10 going on 25.
Yeah. These kids know more at 10 now than I knew at 30.
My son is very, my daughter.
Yeah, we fought to not give cell phones to our kids. They didn't buy them for our younger two until our son was going off to college. Thought it would have been going into her junior year of high school. Everybody else has them, well, that's fine, but what do you want to check in? All these parents are saying, you know, they tell us where we're
Can't
going.
trust them. You cannot trust them.
My
I
son's
used to,
friend,
my oldest, yes. My oldest broke every rule at least once.
my son tried that with everybody else that's got phones, don't you wanna check in? I said, yeah, why don't you use your friend's phone and call us?
Good one.
That's a good rule.
Require that they turn that on. And without getting into it too much, earlier this summer, there was a situation, thankfully, and it was very well.
Also, there's that, there's an app that's 360. That's really nice. Can't think, but I used to have it on my phone. I was over the road, I had, he didn't know I
When they
was
have
trying to know
self-driving
where it
cars,
was
that's
almost
nice.
all the time. But you could have had it.
That are guaranteed safe? Well, being 3 o'clock, we'll call the Marathon County Executive Committee to order, please. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand with me and recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, thank you. And we'll go on to public comment, but before we go to public comment, I'd like to welcome our vice chair back, looking well and doing well, as I understand. So thank you for joining us today, and hope that your recovery, Craig, continues. So thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to public comment. Any public comment for the executive committee? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, approval of the minutes of the September 14th, 2023 executive committee meeting. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson, second by Supervisor Mask. Any discussion on the minutes as presented in the packet? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approval of the minutes of the September 14th, 2023 Executive Committee meeting signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion is carried. Thank you. We'll move on to policy issue potential committee determination. Operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, and/or policy. Discussion and possible action by exec. We have discussion and possible action by exec to forward to the county board for approval, and that is item number 6B1, setting the county board salaries for the 2024-2026 term. Understanding that under statute, we have to set the salaries prior to anyone being able to take out nomination papers. And that holds true for the officers, and so that has to be set now prior to December 1st. And so rather than having that on the board during the budget discussions, I thought it would be appropriate that we have that discussion at exec now with a recommendation to the board so that we can have that discussion at the full board in October. So included in the budget, originally the county board budget is created with the clerk and myself. There was provided in the proposed budget the increase of the same 3% as was provided to all other employees in the county. So I throw it out for discussion by the executive committee. Supervisor Mask, please.
So my first thought was, I suppose if it's appropriate, 3% is just great. However, we've also made a point before that the county board doesn't need a raise and that the money could be better used someplace else in the county. So most of me is not in favor of raising the salaries.
Other discussion? Supervisor Robinson?
I think we ought to give a raise. It was years, we increased the rates last year, but then it was years before that, before we did. And nobody's in this to make money, but there are expenses and other things that are not covered. And I think what you want to do is have some sort of remuneration for the members. And I think the 3% increase is in line with what others are getting, and I would support a 3% increase. You look at Milwaukee, it's 15 years in between since their last pay raise for the mayor and the city council, and there were a lot of extenuating circumstances. But I think that it's hard enough to get people to run for the county board in many cases, and if you're doing your job, you're putting in lots of hours. It's not just the meetings, it's the prep and the other work. So I think that it's deserved and would support it.
Other discussion? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to point out a couple things. On the document, the resolution, it looked a little bit inaccurate for the dollar amount. So I'm just going to, for the vice chair standing committee is written as 56, and actually it should have been 26. I'm just pointing that out so that there'd be some clarity and some changing out. Also, the increases of 370 and 370 increases that were on the previous are actually incorrect. They should be 170. And I think that's because we have the salary, and then you have that additional 800 and 200 in there, which are part of the Rule 19. So it probably made something a little bit hokey there. So I'm just going to point that out, that when the resolution is done, whatever it is, that you just clean that up. another thing is, my question is for the vice chair. It states vice chair, I believe, board member salary. But it's board member salary really plus. And so I'm asking, it seems to be about 14% of the chair. Is there a reason, was there ever a calculation done for that amount? Meaning, once you subtract out the board member salary, then you have the chair's kind of role stipend or whatever you want to call that, role pay. Then you have the vice chair's role pay, and that amount is about 14% of the chair. I just was wondering where that number ever came from for the vice chair. Do we have any idea?
I would have to, I know when we reviewed it, it was based on what was, I think, if I remember correctly, it was based on the responsibilities that was anticipated that not anticipated, the responsibility that the vice chair had in attending and taking over the responsibility of oversight of the strategic plan, and the requirement that he was going to be required to attend each of the standing committees on a quarterly basis. And so it was based on the estimated amount of time that the additional requirements that the vice chair had that he would be taking on. That's as I recall it, and other supervisors can help me and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's how that discussion developed when the vice chair's salary was created and raised.
Additionally, I guess I'm, so at some point some number is established and then it just becomes this 3% kind of add on.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
I did want to bring up, so Rule 19 in our ordinance solidifies or states the 800-200 for the chair of the standing committee and then the vice chair of a standing committee. So would that rule would have to be amended if we wanted any change, any recommendation from the executive committee? So say we wanted the chair of a standing committee to be 1,200, then we would have to update the rule as well.
Correct.
For that.
Our recommendation to the board would, but we'd also have to have a potential budget amendment to accommodate that. In other words, the budget is set now with the 3% increase to accommodate the salaries. And so I believe if we're going to change that, there may have to be a corresponding budget amendment to the proposed budget that would have to be taken back to finance to find out where those funds could come from.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I can.
Go, Lance, please.
And maybe I'm reading this incorrectly, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding the discussion. So your chair of standing committee and your vice chair of standing committee are really based on, they receive the board member amount plus, as Supervisor Dickinson referenced, the additional 800 and 200 respectively.
Correct.
By rule. I guess my thought on the whether Rule 19 would need to be amended would depend on what, if any, action you took. If you took action to simply increase the overall board member salary as the base and left the incremental increases the same, I don't believe you'd need a rule change, but I think I want to make sure I'm following kind of the discussion.
I think that what his suggestion was, if we chose to increase the standing committee chair's stipend of $800, we would have to change the rule. Am I understanding it correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And part of my thought process, and I didn't prepare this I prepared it, but I didn't share it ahead of time, is, it's a little confusing about, where these salaries are coming from. And I understand under statute, the chair and vice chair I've established. And then I understand we have the board member salary. And then we have the standing committee chair and vice chair, which is the board member salary plus a rule. Right. So we've
Correct.
got these pieces. Yep. Where my mindset was kind of going with that is almost establishing a base for everyone and then a role-based salary, establishing that so that you would clearly see that, for example, the chair is the board member salary plus whatever
Whatever
amount
that
it is,
difference number is
clarifying that,
from
right,
our-
$24,000 or $25,000, like that, just for clarity's sake. I didn't really know how to approach that, to bring that up. And two reasons I go there. One, I do believe the standing committee chairs, the 800 is a little low. I would be I would be looking for something like 1,200. And I also believe the vice chair, given a couple situations we've had this year where vice chairs have had to stand in for chairs of standing committees, that there could be a potential bump in that, say, to like 400 instead of the 200, because there are additional responsibilities. I know we even talked about the last year about the expectations of the vice chairs kind of attending exec and these kinds of things, or that sort of thing. So that was where my mind was going. We all have a base, and then we have these role established amounts, clarifying those. And part of that too would be the third piece, is that then our pay raises would be based upon the salary of each person, of a board member's salary. So we would be doing a 3% on the salary, but not necessarily on the role-based amount, right? Which is really what happens for the
Currently.
standing committee chair and vice chair, but doesn't happen. The established salary for the chair and vice chair gets a 3% on the total.
Correct.
So I'm not trying to make it confusing. I apologize for not kind of presenting it ahead, but that's kind of where my mind is going.
So I guess I want to understand, so your suggestion would be, in this case, take the 5,826 off of the 31,827, and that would be the chair's additional salary for election as the chair. And then the 3% would only apply to the base, 5,000, and not the gross? I guess I struggle with that concept, in the fact that and maybe I shouldn't even argue it because I am the chair, but the reality is that then there isn't the equivalent. I mean, I hear that argument when I talk to individuals with Social Security, that they should get instead of just a flat rate increase on Social Security, they should have a amount increase in Social Security. And so now we're saying that the percentage shouldn't apply to the salary portion of the chair or the vice chair. But Supervisor Robinson.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not hearing that I think you could bifurcate it. You could set the base for every supervisor, and then you would look at what the rates are for the committee chairs, vice chairs, chair of the county board, and vice chair of the board each year, and make an incremental increase in those if you wanted to. And you could, have the base go up 3% in the supplement, if you will, go up that same amount. You're not necessarily locked into freezing it. It's how you approach it. So I kind of like the idea of a base plus based upon responsibilities, but I can be convinced otherwise.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Mr. Chair,
Vice Chair McEwen, please.
thank you. As far as just going back to the vice chair of the county board, I believe the increase was based on a $3,000 addition to the base of the regular county board supervisor, and I agree with Supervisor Robinson. I think as far as the 3% increase, I don't think that's is unreasonable. It's not like we're getting a lot of people, running for these positions. I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary as far as the 3%. But I'm getting a little confused as far as the base 3% increase in the pays and 3% increase on the additional. So I guess I'd like that clarified a little bit more. Thank you.
Supervisor Van Cray, please.
Hey, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to offer support for Supervisor Dickinson's suggestion of raising the committee chair and vice chair amounts. I think that there's a significant amount of work that goes into being a chair and a vice chair that doesn't happen with being a regular board member, and so I think that should be rewarded or paid for. And then I'm looking for a little more clarification to the base plus amount for the different roles, because I'm having a hard time thinking through how the chair would then only get a 3% increase on that, $5,600, and they wouldn't get a 3% increase on the full 31. Is that what is being proposed?
I'll let Supervisor Dickinson respond to what, because I'm a little still confused.
Thank you. The thought process is that we're all board members and we get a base salary. And then based upon these 4 established responsibilities, these roles, these chair and vice chair roles, then there is a rule applied amount for that so that you can clarify between the two. Then what you can do from there is however you want to apply it. My first suggestion was you would only apply the 3% to the base because the other amounts would be kind of identified under rule. And either you could additionally apply 3% to that, would be one way to do it, or what you could do is just adjust those amounts. So the first example that I said of 3% only on base and nothing else was just one example of what you're doing. My main thought process in bringing it forward was to have it clarified more kind of in a column, base, roll. How are you going to adjust that? Is it going to be 3%? Or is it going to be adjusting, like in this case, if we are going to go for standing committee chair and vice chair, we have to then adjust the rule. We can't, we're not just going to, because, so I hope that makes more sense.
Yeah, I guess the only, yeah.
And I'm not
It does.
suggesting,
No.
not suggesting we do that right now.
Sure.
But it was something that occurred to me, and I started thinking about it, and I wrote it down.
The one thing that I would refer to legal counsel on, Corp counsel is not here, so I'll look to administrator, even though he's in recovery, is withdrawal or recovery, one of the two, is I know that it's required to be set, and so can you set that salary in the rule and not be set, because then the rule potentially could be changed, but that's by the board at the organizational meeting. That's the part that I'm wondering so where is the county board's salaries set so that we don't get into a situation where somebody wants to, Corp counsel would tell us that we couldn't do it, but I don't think that we can set it in a rule. The supplement, I think, is in the rule. It's Rule 19. I get that, but I don't think we can set the salaries in the rule because it has to be set prior to paper being taken out. So I guess the question becomes, do I understand that correctly?
Being that I'm in recovery or withdrawal, I believe that's accurate, that you need to, it would be set by action of the board prior to papers being taken out. I don't think there's any prohibition on adopting a framework similar to what Supervisor Dickinson has alluded to. I'll have to give some thought, and I'll talk with Mike about what, if anything, then gets incorporated into Rule 19, but by Chapter 59, there are specific strictures on how and when salaries must be set, not only for the county board, but for other elected officials as well.
John, and I'll expand upon that just a little bit. I know that previous Corp Council ruled that we were allowed to change the salary on the vice chair after the fact. So after papers were taken out, the vice chair's salary could be changed after during the organizational meeting, but the chair's salary could not. And that was a specific ruling because we had missed the date when there was discussion about changing the chair's salary at one time. And so the chair's salary was effectively frozen for that full term, but the vice chair's salary could be adjusted. So that's the only reason I bring it up, is so I'm not trying to throw water on anybody's suggestion, because I think it's a great suggestion that we could adopt, but we just need to adopt it correctly, and however, or make the recommendation to the full board, however we want to spell it out. Supervisor Robinson, please.
So the question for our withdrawing or recovering or whatever the adjective, does form matter if it's in a rule, a resolution, or an ordinance relative to setting it?
Good question. We'll have to get back to you.
So any further discussion, or any recommendations or motions? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
So I would keep it pretty simple. I would go with the 3% as we have it normally done. And I would also want to make that, I would like to put in, I guess, a motion to amend to make the standing committee chair 1,200 and the vice chair 400.
Okay.
All right.
So there's a motion on the floor to increase salaries by 3% in, let me just make sure I'm clear, 3% per year? That's what's been,
Correct.
okay, 3% per year. The way we have done it historically, and that was on the full salary of the chair, the vice chair, and board members. And then a increase for the chair standing committees from 800 to 1,200, and the vice chairs from 200 to 400. Okay, is there a second? Second by Supervisor Mask. Any further discussion? Supervisor Robinson.
So I'm looking for clarification, then how are we then handling the chair and the vice chair under your motion?
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Yeah, it would just be the 3% to the amount that is already existing. So in this case, I believe it's 31,827 for chair, so it would be 3% of that. And then it would be the vice chair, which is at 95,39, 3% to that. And then the next year's 3%, yeah. So we would, the stuff I brought up, I'll withhold that.
Okay. I think we could also spell that out, that the chair is a member of the board and their base salary is this, and because they're chair, they receive this difference. I don't know that there's any reason that we can't spell that out. Any further discussion? I guess implicit in that motion would this be referred then to HR Finance, because there is 6 standing committees, and we're talking 6 vice chairs, 4 times 6, 2,400, and an additional $4,800 budget adjustment for the budget for 2024 that's not been budgeted for currently. Would that recommendation then be referred to the HR Finance Committee? Is that where you're recommending that go? Okay. Supervisor Robinson?
I am thinking out loud, so,
Yeah, I know.
because we're not committing resources in this year. We are committing resources after April of next year. It may not need to go to HR Finance for action if it's incorporated into the budget, but we'll take it up no matter what, because we'll need to adjust those numbers, but I'm not sure because we're committing we can't bind future boards, but we are binding future boards, but we're not spending money in this year, therefore we're spending it in next year.
I believe what, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I think what I understood the idea being that it go to HR Finance for discussion for the
For the
20
4,800 adjustment,
for the
correct.
2024 budget. And I mean, the short answer is, I have some math to do to see what your percentage was that we built in with the county board budget, which is actually in your packet, I think on the next page, to see what you just calculated for that incremental increase, and we'll see where that puts us.
Okay, all right.
Just to let you know, when you look at your budget, that is not only the county board members, but it does include 0.3% or 30% of an FTE for 2 people from the county clerk's office too. So if you're trying to do the math backwards, it won't quite work because there'll be part of David and part of Kelly's wages
That's
are in that number.
why we
too.
came
Just
up with a
wanna-
4.1%
Right.
increase?
Yep.
Gotcha.
Just want to make sure you guys knew that.
Gotcha, because we did do that math prior to our meeting. I was going to ask
I did
about
too, and
that.
I'm like, well, that didn't seem right. So, yep, they're also in that, that line item.
So again, if the motion's approved, we've got, in essence, we've created a $4,800 shortfall in our budget to pay out the additional, well, no, exactly, 48 plus 24, so it'd be 7,200 shortfall for that increase in those salaries. Supervisor Robinson?
I'll offer an amendment when we get to the budget discussions to request finance look at that.
Perfect, okay. Any other discussion on the motion? Again, so the motion, so everyone's clear, is a 3% increase to the salaries as existing, and a increase to the standing committee chairs and vice chairs. Standing committee chairs going from 800 to 1,200, and the vice chairs going from 200 to 400. Any further discussion? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
So a question and then about Rule 19, is that required to be amended during this process? For like when we vote on the budget, since it's a standing rule?
It would be it would be, as I would say, it would be coming in from rules review, well, it would be a recommendation into the budget, to the rules to be adopted at the organizational meeting in April of 2024.
Yeah, I think that's right, because of course you're not changing the salaries during the term. It would,
Right.
I think that's good too, to know it's got to go 2 places.
Yep, 2 places. Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. While we are on the county board's budget, I would, one of the things that was included in our budget has been a historic precedent that was set when we put $30 a month into each supervisor to pay for internet. So I just bring it up for discussion. if we want to continue that, or we want to modify that, or if we want to eliminate that, being that there's an expectation that everybody has internet. So I throw it out for discussion. Supervisor Dickinson, please.
I would see no reason to change it.
Supervisor Mask.
I agree because I know mine went up.
Any other discussion or debate? Everybody there? All right, then we will move on.
Mr. Chair?
Well,
Hello. I was just going to make
Go
one
ahead.
other comment if I could. People can always turn it down. So if someone doesn't want to take it, they can turn it down. I believe their salary as well as a board member, you could even turn that down, right? You don't have to accept that? Do we know?
Yeah, that was tried, and I don't believe that was, they can direct it to a charity, but I don't believe that they can turn it down. But
You have to
don't quote me on
specifically
that.
request the internet reimbursement. That's not wrapped in automatically.
Right, because
yeah.
they have to still certify.
Right.
There is a certification requirement that they certify that they do have and are paying more than they're being reimbursed for internet. Okay, we will move on to a discussion of HR Finance Property Committee's 2024 proposed budget and possible recommendations regarding modifications. And the one department that the Executive Committee has responsibility over is administration. So I'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will try to spare everyone. You've all sat through the kind of opening remarks I've made in every of the standing committees. Suffice to say, administration's budget is a perfect example of each of the two kind of principles that have underlied those comments: status quo and a lot of change on the accounting side. So I just thought I'd go through a couple of things that, at least when I look at this, I think you might have questions about. And the first, I'll start with the budget to actual. So as I said before, status quo, there are no new programs or services really planned for 2024. But when you look at budget to actual, a couple of things. I anticipated there might be a question, well, salaries, you're not, we're talking, this is through mid-September, and you're only just shy of 322,000 through the full budget year of 541,000. Short explanation for that is the data officer was hired in September. So we should be a little bit kind of lagging there. Of course, we budgeted that individual for the entire year of 23. The short explanation for why I waited, we didn't have capacity to onboard anyone, and we waited until we thought we had that capacity, but it's still, it's a heavy lift, but she's fantastic. She's doing a great job. So then in 24, it's the full salaries for all of those employees that are listed within the budget message. The other the only other significant, in my estimation, of the lines that are listed for where we are in 23 versus the full budget year would be other professional services. That's a line about just kind of in the middle of the page, where the full year budget is 1.33 million essentially, and we're about 740,000 through that. That line item relates to our justice system program. So I know this body's familiar with it, but within administration, we have kind of the general administration programs we deliver, and then a significant portion of our work is justice alternatives. The justice alternatives coordinator is within administration, and that is all contractual. I shouldn't say all, but largely contractual services by a vendor, and simply put, the bills lag. It's a lot of work with our treatment courts, our pretrial supervision program, and if you're interested, there was a very nice presentation that was done at Public Safety earlier this week on Tuesday that Judge O'Neill, who's the chair of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, went through and kind of gave an update on all those programs and services. So that's the short explanation there. It is virtually all of that line item, not only for 23, but planned for 24. So those are the big ones from budget to actual that I think would stand out if you had questions. The other piece that I'll talk about is really that accounting side. Maybe I'm biased here, but I think administration's budget is the one that got the mapping changes the most. There are a lot of dashes in the administration budget, and the short answer for that is we changed those chart of accounts like I've talked about in a number of other meetings. I'll just highlight a couple of things that were added. So the legal services line item within the budget, which is probably a third down the list on the first page, you'll see that it went from, it got mapped to increase to 25,000. We have not spent very much in 23. That was remapped. That used to be under that special projects denotation, the special projects line that lived outside of administration. So as part of the workday process, that was remapped to administration, which again, as I'll talk about with some other things, makes logical sense because people would come to administration if we needed to procure legal services. I'd speak with Corp Counsel about that, but if we had the need to get employment counsel or some other type of legal counsel for a specific opinion, that would be funded out of that special projects budget.
And the dollar amount is the kind of the cap of which can be provided. So just that also answers just why it's at 25,000.
Yeah. Thanks, Christy. The other one that really highlights the remapping of those funds would be sundry contractual services, and the short explanation of what is sundry. It's stuff that isn't otherwise easily explained or fit in another box. You'll see that the 2023 budget previously, as it was mapped, was just shy of 70,000. It is now 300 and just shy of 70,000. The reason again there is that came over from part of that special projects budget, and what that has funded out of that special projects fund that used to live within kind of really its own fund were things like Vice Chair McEwen is on, and we've had a number of presentations with our Regional Forensic Science Center project. We've had a lot of work that has been done, whether it's through WIFLE or some work to generate pamphlets or informational materials. Those would be funded from that. With the board's work to consider remodeling to the jail kitchen, we had initial architecture work that was done there. Similarly, initial architecture work for remodeling as opposed to a new build for the training center for the sheriff's office. Those things get funded out of that. That also is the site, or the source rather, for the website annual payment when we moved away from doing that internally with staff resources and went with a vendor. There's also some justice system contracts that are and services that are outside of that large other professional services line for added correctional services. All those things come out of that remapped sundry contractual services line. So that's one of those areas that have changed. I'll give you one other example. We recently had a server upgrade within the sheriff's office, a migration that was outside of our larger IT project, and a funding source needed to be identified for that, and it was that special projects fund. Another example, meeting expenses. Again, I talked about administration being both justice system and kind of general administration. We had meeting expenses that lived within the Justice Alternatives budget, which also had grant funds within it. And like we've talked about in each of the other standing committees, we now have a designated grant fund. So if you go to the next page within the packet, you'll see that grant fund essentially balances to zero, and it's a much lower amount than 2023. That's because the grant fund used to also have levy in it. So a lot of things were remapped, suffice it to say. The other thing that came over that I wanted to highlight so that give you some explanation here is well, there's no other capital equipment, this line item that has come over from, this also was within special projects. It is for small capital projects if we have an individual within a department that, people retire or take a new position, and it's probably the first time we've been able to get in there and paint their office and perhaps put new carpet in. People come and ask me for where are we going to pay for that. That is what that $40,000 is for, because individual departments don't fund those sort of capital projects within their own budget. And let's see if I had any. I wanted to also highlight another increase, just to let you know. If you look at support for other agencies, that did go up $15,000, and that's not because we're providing more financial support. It is because, again, a function of remapping. The $223,133, that was the amount that has historically been allocated for those nonprofits. The United Way, the Women's Community, McDevco, the Historical Society, those were funded from that $223,000. The one that was not historically in that bucket but was funded from another funding source was Judicare Mediation. It was still, of course, debated by the county board, and it's referenced extensively within the budget message, but we put those things together. So that's the reason for the $15,000 increase. So with all that remapping, it looks as though county administration is up about $250,000. Let me just again emphasize that's a function of remapping, not a function of us doing anything else. Our goal when we looked at our budget was to essentially fund all of the increases for personnel, so the 3% and the increased costs in health insurance. So it's not a function of, hey, we're doing something fundamentally new. But all that said, happy to answer any questions or discuss further if you'd like.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you. As it relates to the sundry contractual services and some of the other items that you just highlighted, do we have the ability in those areas where there is grant funding tied into the programs to then allocate those costs back to potentially capture some of those grant funds?
The answer is yes. And if you look to the next page, I could have done a better job of explaining that. So historically, when you look at our 2023 budget as amended, you'll see the top line in the grant fund actually had $293,000 of tax levy in there in addition to the other grant funding. And the reason for that was we essentially poured the required match and other funding into that grant fund. We stopped that practice, as Christie's referenced in some of the other standing committee meetings. Right now, it is that grant fund. We identified the specific things that we are going to utilize the grant to pay for. So you'll see that in 23, for example, there was, it's further away on the screen, closer here, $8,000 for meeting expenses, $15,000 for lab and medical, and then another $15,000 for building offices and rent. We transitioned those things back out of the grant fund because, quite simply, the grant amounts did not cover those things. We do have tracking within our new system where we know that those things are eligible for grant reimbursement. We will maximize grant reimbursement first. However, there's not enough grant dollars to cover them. So they actually go into, we have another accounting line for essentially our match. So a lot of things have moved, but to your specific question about are we ensuring that we are maximizing our usage of grants, the answer is yes, I believe we are. The other thing I want to make clear with our justice system budget, we do receive revenue from the state of Wisconsin. They pay, it's actually through the Department of Corrections. I can show it actually on the sheet here. It's in the General 101 fund. You'll see the line that says other services to state government. That is a revenue line, the $239,000, that offsets some of our expenses within the other professional services line because the State Department of Corrections actually pays us to facilitate case management and treatment services. We call it, of course, an acronym, our CMTS program, for individuals that are on probation. A good example would be individuals that are on probation in our treatment courts. As was referenced at Public Safety on Tuesday, they are on probation, but they receive a higher level of service through our treatment courts. And thankfully, the Department of Corrections actually does some work to offset that cost.
Okay, other questions for the administrator on the administration's budget? Supervisor Robinson?
Not for this year, but for future years. Does it make sense for us to evaluate whether to create a separate budget line item for justice alternative programs versus the administrator's budget? Because I think it sort of distorts.
There isn't a separate cost center, but we just don't have more than 1 year's worth of data. So it used to live in a separate little sub-fund in the general fund. Now it is a separate cost center, but we just didn't know how to present it to you because I'd be taking a little bit out of the public special projects from the 2023, and I'd be taking a little bit out of those. So I think in the future, once we have clean years, we would definitely be able to do that because I can see the cost center right now for that. It just, on this transition year, it was rather hard to try to give you a logical pattern of how that is. But we definitely do, and I think that's been really helpful, particularly in justice alternatives, because they have very comprehensive programming, but they don't get as many grants as some of our other places. So we can now pull that either by the program called Justice Alternatives, or we can pull it by the grant fund for those parts of their program that are covered by grants.
The only other thing I'll add to that is I think there's merit, and we've talked about this at a very high level right now, but more conversations to come at Public Safety about potentially reorganizing and creating a formal justice alternatives department. A number of other counties have that, or some call it a corrections department. I have a fair amount more to learn about the opportunities for reimbursement. I'll just give you one example. Some of the programs and services we deliver may be able to get some reimbursement through CCS, which you've heard about through social services, comprehensive community services. So we'll evaluate that, and I know we have already started that conversation at Public Safety, but to your specific question, Supervisor Robinson, I think yes. My hope is whether it's next year or shortly thereafter, regardless of whether a new department is created, I think breaking out the justice alternatives in terms of how we report it to the board would be helpful. And that was one of the requests from Public Safety, really to get better insight on the costs of the various programs. And I know it's been a point of conversation at this committee as well, and I have already on my work plan for next year, there was a motion to have me look at how to report through the budget program costs by July of next year. So yes, certainly on the radar.
The one comment that I will make, the mapping, has created confusion, challenges, understanding of how the different years trying to compare 2022 to 2023 to 2024 really has created some maybe some skepticism, and I don't want to, but when you go from 38,000 or 36,000 chart of accounts to a chart of accounts that mirrors the state, it brings down some of the complexity and the ability to lose things. And so I appreciate the combining of these accounts. I think it will do us much more in looking in the future to be able to do comparisons from one year to the next when we have some historic data. But I think it really created a challenge trying to create that historic data to compare today. But I want to, express my thanks to the finance department and to administration for all of their efforts to try to explain that. They've done as good a job as you can in the challenge that has been there throughout all of the departments and all of the subcommittees, standing committees that they've had. Supervisor Robinson,
I
please.
just wanted to pick up on that thought and again thank the Finance Department for doing that. But the other advantage that we have with that revised chart of account is our comparability to other benchmarks in other counties. So I think it's a good thing for us if we want to try to look at how do we compare in cost and subcategories to other counties, and will make evaluation easier or comparison easier.
Other discussion? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in regards to nonprofits, and reading through your budget message, there's really two questions that come up. One, are the amounts that are listed in the budget, are the entire amount all considered contracted?
The entire amount's listed on, if you tell me the page, I can. My one caveat is the women's community.
Page 31 of your budget,
31.
which equates, the total amount is the 238,133.
Yes, that's the amount that is now referenced right here, where it has grown from the 223. That's the additional 15,000 for mediation, which is why I put the asterisks on there. My only caveat is the women's community also gets some money statutorily through, I believe it comes out of Kim's budget, out of the clerk's office budget.
Marriage license.
And that's a marriage license transfer that goes directly there. These amounts are the amounts that are tied to the specific contracts that I referenced later in the budget message. Another example, McDevco does get some funds for running our POUTS loan program and our GAP financing program. Those predate me, but these are the specific funds that related to the services that the board was discussing back in 2018, 2019. I know that's a complex answer, but for example, McDevco, that 40,000 used to go to the Entrepreneurial Center for doing entrepreneurial education. When the Entrepreneurial Center outsourced its oversight to McDevco, McDevco took over that training component, which is why they have the 40,000. That's probably more confusing than it was worth.
No, so it seems that the amounts are 100% outside of the one caveat there of the Women's Center, women's community. Really what we've done is we've said, well, this is the amount and we're going to contract that amount.
Correct.
Right?
And then
to clearly in your message say this is what that money is going for, and we're considering them a contracted amount.
Yeah.
Okay. So then I do have a question. And so then if we're contracting these services and costs go up for these services, wouldn't it be logical in your budget to increase the budgeted amount, the funding?
it would be logical. The direction I got from the standing committees was
Same
no
number.
more than 100% of last year's cost and no less than 92% of last
8%
year's
district-
cost.
district.
I could cut up to 8. So I would agree with you. Costs go up. Nonprofits are a very lean machine, and I basically told them you're getting either the same or less.
So then the
Yep.
comment becomes, given this discussion that's occurred over these past years,
Every year.
there's a little bit of I guess, I don't know if I'm the cynic, that it seems like how we're handling this is we have said, we're going to fund nonprofits with a contract, and as that happens, it would seem logical that we're going to increase that funding in the future, is what it seems like. And this kind of that would be the expectation, I would think. That would be the logical one, unless we actually, every budget, we establish that, just like we did this year, that within that range. So that's really just the comment. I think that's a fair comment to say. Thank you.
I would agree with you. The one example of a direct contracted service, excuse me, that's outside of these that we do contract with an entity for, that their budget also hasn't grown, is Attic Correctional Services. We have essentially held them static for, I believe it's 8 or 9 years. But to your point, costs do go up, and then you would have to. The flip side to the logic of costs going up is if you're not going to pay more, then you are going to get less, right? So I think at some point, I think it's logical to assume that conversation will need to be had.
But also, those contracts are negotiated each year based on the budget.
Correct.
Other discussion? Supervisor Robinson?
Not necessarily on the administrator's budget, but relative to the discussion that we had earlier, I would make a motion that we request the Finance Committee address the additional cost associated with the action that we took relative to county board salaries.
Okay, is there a second? Second by Supervisor Dickinson. Any discussion? Any discussion? So the motion is for the HR Finance Committee to review the additional funding request that was made consistent to the board salaries in the budget itself. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Any other discussion on the administration's budget? Okay. Seeing none, we are down to the next item on the agenda, the next meeting date and announcements of future agenda. Committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. Next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, November 9th at 3 p.m. Any announcements? Seeing none, we're down to item number 9. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Dickinson, second by Supervisor Robinson to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.